Soft White Underbelly is about giving people a space to tell their stories, even when these stories challenge what we think we know. Ground News shows us different perspectives in the media, which is why Ground News is a perfect sponsor for my channel. In a world where algorithms censor much of the information we receive, some of the most important stories get missed from our news feeds. Ground News highlights local news from around the world, giving you an on-the-ground perspective that national coverage might miss. The app and website empowers you to form your own opinions by presenting you with every article published on any news story worldwide. My favorite part of the app is the data it gives you on each news source as you read it, such as where it leans on the political spectrum, a factuality rating indicating how subjective their printed reporting tends to be, and who funds it. I particularly like their blind spot feed, dedicated to showing you news stories that are underrepresented in the mainstream media. You can check this all out by scanning the QR code on screen or clicking the link below. It's easy to forget how much bias can shape the reality we live in. And in a world where our attention is constantly being fought over, my Vantage Plan easily helps me keep up with more important stories slipping through the cracks. So I encourage you to check them out at ground.news/SWU. Subscribe through my link to save 40% off their Vantage Plan. And by subscribing or even gifting it to someone you know, you're helping hold the media accountable and helping my channel directly. Thank you for watching. We'll just start out with a hard question. What's been the most disturbing patient you've seen at LA County Jail?
At LA County Jail, it was an inmate who, there's a couple, but I would say like the three that come to mind. One had repetitively attempted to sever his penis, and it, had been successfully resected multiple times, but it was becoming more and more difficult to do that. And the question of preventing him from doing that was also very difficult and challenging.
How would you find something to cut it with?
Right. So exactly, right. So we don't have, that's a great question for somebody who's not incarcerated, right? So there are, inmates are extremely resourceful. That's one thing I've learned. And, we had this particular inmate, we had a special room that in the hospital inside Twin Towers that had been really designed almost for him to not have any way of creating a tool to sever his penis. People will say that like a padded room. I wouldn't say it's not a padded room, but it doesn't have it just doesn't have anything extra. How's that? Yet, the resourcefulness does work its way in. So there's times where he, needs to be transported out of that room to another area, and it takes like a second for him to see something on the floor and pick it up or put it on between his toes, let's say, and then use that and then work on that to do. So there are always ways. And we even have a one-to-one watching the person. So in the room, like watching the person outside the room. But that's not even enough, because the one-to-one, the studies show, it's actually not somebody watching them the whole time. It's every 11 seconds, or 11 minutes, sorry, is what it comes out to. Because the person is going to look away, they're going to write something, they're going to, So in between those times is when these things would occur. So if you can imagine, we have somebody paid to just sit there and also watch. And he'd also, in between the times where he would, in particular, do damage to his genitals, he was acting out in other ways. So it was a constant, there was constantly noise coming out of that room, right? And I think, so then the question is, what do you do? How do you control this, right? So can you put somebody in restraints? Yeah, you can. And it sounds awful. And I know that people, it's hard for people to imagine what that might even look like. And even putting this patient in restraints when we would, it doesn't feel good. It to me feels like I'm taking away something from this person too. And it feels like a failure. It feels like I can't help him, Can we medicate him to the point where he's like immobile? I mean, that's not really like good care, and certainly that was maybe something that was done previously. But I was on call. I was somehow on the unit at the time, or on the person on call when this particular time where he managed to find something. I think it was like a part of the molding on the wall or something, and he had inserted it into his urethra. And it was large. There was like, he was bleeding, and so I sent him out. We called the ambulance, sent him out to county, and I remember the feeling of when he was leaving, and them taking to the hospital, feeling like at least he's out of this room. And he's going to be somewhere else. And I don't know if he's going to I don't know if he's going to be able to not do something to himself, to harm himself, if we have this much control here, But at least the quality of life that this person has here is so bad, even though we're keeping him supposedly safe, that I felt a sense of just relief in that he was able to get into the hospital gurney and go. And I thought to myself, I have not helped him. I failed him, and we failed him. And, I never asked about him, because sometimes they'll stay for like a month or two in the hospital there, before they're transferred back. And sometimes they're transferred to possibly to another, like maybe to Metropolitan, et cetera. So I usually followed up, but I never asked about him because I assumed that he had just, I don't know, I wanted to believe that he would just be okay, that he was finally going to be in peace, and, that, or that if he had died, it was the end of the story, and I didn't really, I would then feel even more responsible, I think, because I really did fail him.
Do you know what ultimately happened?
Yeah, I do. It's going to sound so crazy, but it's true. I worked at a clinic a few years ago in the community, and I also see like HIV positive patients in particular, and he was HIV positive, and I saw his name on my schedule for that day, and it's a very unusual name. Like you couldn't miss it. Like, and I thought, there's no way that this person is on my list. Like how is that possible? And when I went into the room, he looked different, obviously. Like he's gained a lot of weight. He looked different. But I asked him, like, do you remember me? Like, do you remember, being at Twin Towers? And he said he did remember me. He didn't remember what happened that last time, and the details of it. But he did remember that, I was part of his care. And he had, from that point, he had actually stayed in the hospital. And then my supervisor, a really good psychiatrist named Dr. Ortego, went to court and basically advised that he not be returned to jail, and that he go to, his mother was willing to take him in, and that he can be on an ankle monitor there. And he did that. And then he finished his time, and he has his own apartment now, and he was compliant with his HIV medications, which he wasn't before. And it was a little surreal to think that, you know, that somebody that sick, environment can make such a big impact. You know?
Do you feel like you sometimes make a dent in their mental health? You actually help them?
In corrections?
Yeah.
That's a good question. I think, yes, I do, but I often feel like this could have been prevented altogether, you know? So I'm there too, like, it's like I'm there way too late, like years later than I should be there, you know? And, like when, you know, I don't know if, I don't think it's talked about very often, but like there is something that can happen when people are really psychotic for a long time and have severe psychosis, which is, there are different types of self-harm, and one of them is self-enucleation, which is taking your eye out.
Taking your own eye out?
Yes. Yeah. And I've seen that 3 times in the correctional setting, which is statistically pretty high percentage. And in every one of those cases, you know, we really, that person shouldn't have really been in the prison system, right? When we were looking at how sick they are, right? I mean, that's the sickest person in terms of, you know, a psychiatric condition. But there they are, right? Just in like one of the most dangerous.
How do they remove it? With their fingers or with a tool?
No, finger. Yeah, finger. And
they lose their vision after this?
Yeah. So
of course.
Yeah, definitely. It's very hard to. Even if we're able to keep the eye and send it to the hospital. I've never seen it resected successfully. And in one case, it's almost hard to talk about it because it's not that I'm traumatized by it, but I feel like I've never, like, these are things that happen, you know, inside psychiatric hospitals, inside correctional systems, and nobody really ever would know about it or see it. And so these are things I don't, I feel like it's not about a HIPAA violation, because I'm not going to name the person, but I feel almost like I'm disclosing how sick, you know, a person can be, you know, and there's and I've been protective to some degree of that population.
Do you think the mental health facilities should be expanded, or there should be more of them in this country? And what happens is these people are on the streets and then they end up in jail, prison.
Yeah, there's this one patient I can think of right now who she took her eye out, and unfortunately this is going to sound really shocking, and I'm sorry, but she ingested it right after she took it out.
She ate?
Yes, right there, right. Wow. And so she was new to prison, actually. So this is in the California Department of Corrections. So we have licensed psychiatric facilities inside California Department of Corrections, which should itself kind of give you some hint as to the community need, right? But she had been transferred there because her roommate had said she was talking to herself and wasn't eating. And there's like a number of things that I could go into as to how, like, at the system level that she was at, this could have been prevented, but I don't think that's going to be of utility. The bigger question is, how did she even end up in this prison, right? So she's somebody who, so it's not very hard to look up charges. She tried to take her partner's eye out, right, while she was psychotic. But, found, it's like impossible to find somebody actually, for the court to decide that somebody is guilty or not guilty by reason of insanity. Impossible. I mean, this person was so psychotic, she was hearing voices, she tried to take her partner's eyeball out. She was considered to be not insane at the time. Meanwhile, I went and got the records of the jail she was at while she was awaiting trial, and she was in suicide gown for months. She was in the psychiatric. I mean, none of this was consistent with a picture of somebody who just tried to take someone's eye out because they were in a domestic violence situation, for example. And so when you're newly transferred, so one thing that I think people don't know, is the huge number of people who are mentally ill in the correctional system. Okay, so there's 30% of the inmates at the California Department of Correction, which is the second largest system in the United States, are on an antipsychotic, just right off the bat.
They're on antipsychotic medications?
30%, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. That's big, right? So, and it's, you have to really prescribing antipsychotics in the correctional system, because there's court cases overseeing care. You really have to show why and prove it. It's not just like people are writing antipsychotics just to put people to sleep, right? These are necessary. And so 30% is a pretty high number. Back then there was about 125,000 inmates. At the county level, while there's about 15,000 inmates at Twin Towers, 100,000 people go through Twin Towers a year, right? And we only have 34 psychiatric beds there, but there were about 500 units called high observation housing, which is where I worked, which is basically 300 to 500 people on suicide watch, but not in a hospital. In gowns, in a cell though, with the guards can only get to them every 20 to 30 minutes, right? And psychiatrists were assigned, I think, 80 of them at a time, let's say. And I mean, that's unsafe, just unsafe. Me just saying that just doesn't sound good, safe, right? How can you possibly keep that many people on suicide watch without really having them, though, on the type of watch and medications and et cetera needed, right? Well, that's not a small number when I say 300 to 500, right? It's a big number of people. And so some of those people were found incompetent to stand trial, by the way, is different than insanity for guilty or not guilty, right? Incompetent to stand trials, you're deemed that you can't really participate in your own defense. But we can transfer that. They're ordered to be transferred to a psychiatric state hospital for restoration of competency, which can take up to 3 years. But at that time, the wait time was 3 months. So imagine you're so sick that you're incompetent to stand trial, but it's going to be 3 months before we can send you to the state hospital.
Wow. So
then in the meantime, you get to be in this cell without clothes on. Maybe we'll give you clothes. Maybe it's really loud. It's definitely not therapy, let's just say. And I don't have the power to actually utilize treatment in the same way I do in a psychiatric hospital. So meaning, these officers are not nurses, right? So I can't say, give him an injection, right? So they don't want to use force. I really think it's not something but we've made them psychiatric nurses. We have 2 officers taking care of 800 psychiatrically ill inmates. What could possibly go wrong, right? And actually, one of the enucleation cases was that case. So in these pods, I feel like LA County. Like I feel this, like LA County is runs the jail system in LA County, obviously, but it's not that easy to speak up against a big system, by the way, which maybe is part of my hesitancy, because I have, and it's not quite as you would think that it would be. It's what people want for a doctor to really advocate on behalf of mentally ill inmates. Like, how much more periphery could you get? You're incarcerated and you have a serious psychiatric illness. So who's advocating for you? Your family doesn't even know you're here, right? You can't even give me the name of a family member for me to call, right? So it is my duty, right, to advocate for patients like that. But it's not so simple, because there are, it's a big system. And, when I first started working there, I knew that I was seeing like way too many people who were on suicide watch without the right type of what we call true, like, security and therapeutic. I mean, it was just, I would wake up in the middle of the night and like wonder if I had missed seeing somebody, like, and whether that person was going to be found, like, hanging in the morning. But one of the things they tried to do is like this midway while we're waiting for Metro spots to open. So they have inmates, they bring them out of the pods and they put them in. They're like these metal tables. It's like an octagon, imagine the space. And it's called group, so it's like group therapy. But they're cuffed to a table, each of them, right? And then usually there's like, they bring a TV in because they don't have individual TVs in HOH housing. And, it's like, it's not like they're putting on like cognitive behavioral therapy or like, something like nature, even like a river. I mean, I don't know. It's always like, sometimes it's like violent movies. I'm like, this is, there's no like directive as to like what we're showing, Now, today, we're going to go to like, how to, what do these medications mean that we're giving you, or some sort of educational value, right? No, there's just a TV, and it's up to kind of whoever the moderator is to turn on a channel to whatever. And then they sit there for, I think, half an hour or so, maybe an hour, I'm not sure. But in one of these cases, an inmate, he had, by the way, already enucleated one eye before. So he had only one eye. Okay. Like dead giveaway. This is like a high risk person already who has done that. And in group, he enucleated his other eye in front of everyone else.
So he's removed both of his eyes.
Now he has no eyes, yeah. And the other inmates are chained to the table. Like they can't even they're get away.
They're handcuffed?
Sorry. I shouldn't say handcuffed. Yes, that's maybe a little. They're handcuffed, and they're kind of right next to him. Like they can't even really
stand back.
No, and they're not well either, by the way, which is why they're in that housing unit, right? So it's a chaos, and the officers are putting each person. It takes a lot of people to put a lot of people back at the same time, and then get an ambulance to come for this person. And it's for that person. So he was hearing voices, and the voices told him to take his eye out. It was God telling him to take his eye out. So we can't necessarily. There's certain things we cannot reverse and we can't make better, but we are at a point in neuropsychiatry where we can prevent the type of psychosis that leads to that. Like we can. Like it's 2025. We're able to we have really good medications now that are not, this isn't the 70s and 80s anymore, right? We have medications that actually prevent recidivism. This guy who enucleated himself the second time around, that doesn't need to happen. And what do I mean by that? So we have medications in particular, like there's one, and it's actually once a month, it's an injection for schizophrenia, 30% reduction in recidivism, like no brainer, right? This is like a no brainer, right? And we were not allowed to use it at the jail at the time because it's $1,400. But so a logical person would say $1,400 once a month versus 1 day in the ER, right? One week in the jail, right? In the criminal system. But we were not allowed to use it at that time, and we could. And this was really frustrating because when you feel like you can, it's like having a patient who has cancer, and I can't give them the chemotherapy that works, right? That's exactly what it is. There's nothing about psychiatry that is not as lethal, as oncology. Psychiatry is about life and death just as much, but yet it was being treated as though it wasn't. That it's kind of like these are people. And I hate to say this, but I think there's a sense that, we went back and forth about this. I left the jail because of this, but the answer I got was $1,400. These are inmates. Are they really going to follow up? Are they really going to come back to take them? And the way if you look at the population as being not as worthy of what's actually evidence-based, right? Then you're going to end up with more and more egregious cases, like I just told you. Which that wasn't. That I can tell you more. I have so many of these. I can tell you, But we're.
I'd love to hear more.
Yeah. So this one is. It's hard to imagine it. So, but when I was at CIW, we have the women. So there's only 2 women's prisons in the California state system, but only one of them, which is in Corona, has a psychiatric hospital, right? So from everywhere else, they get transferred there if they need psychiatric inpatient level care. Also, this includes, I don't know if you are familiar with something called the California Youth Authority. Mm-hmm. So you can be an adult and still be in the California Youth Authority if you were tried as a juvenile, right? But there's 23-year-olds. So I was on call and was told there's a transfer coming, and I was told, you need to be there when the ambulance arrives. And when you're on call, you don't always go right in. You wait. There's a lot of things you do over the phone. It's really one person covering a whole prison, right? So a lot of it's done, through, we have orders we give, et cetera. But I was told you need to go in and you need to meet the ambulance when it comes, because this is coming, a 23-year-old coming from CIW, and what she had done is she had already jumped through a window and had broken her arm, but had huge laceration. I think it's, pretty much the whole extent of one of her arms. The main issue was that in terms of, it had been several months, but the wound was not only was it not healing, but she was opening it up and putting feces in it. Yeah, actively. And it's a huge wound. It's huge, right? So it's not only not going to get better, right, but she's going to become septic, right? So, and this was kind of we're really at a point where, we need to do everything we can, but because she's coming from CYW, California, be very careful because, of using force, et cetera, because there's going to be like eyes on this, et cetera. There's a lot of politicking in general, as you would imagine in big state systems. And so I met the ambulance when it came, and we brought her in. And you can't just put somebody in restraints like right away. You can be like, okay, restraints. So you have to, it's crazy. It was like 10 officers in riot gear there with me. Like, she's still just a 23-year-old female. I mean, like, I think you can calm down, And there was this whole like show of force, and it was like Hannibal Lecter. Like, you think that was just a movie, but no. It was like they had the whole mask on her, in the chair, with, strapped completely, just like that, right? And I, and I was told, you can't go in, once we brought her into the hospital and had her in the room, you can't go in the room by yourself with her. But at the same time, she didn't, she was, as soon as a cop was going to come anywhere near her, she was going to freak out and start opening a wound if I took her out of one of the trains. So ultimately, point of the story is, I did actually enter the room without the cops, I should say the sheriffs, who were just following their orders. I want to say that. They weren't being aggressive. They were just following their protocol. But I talked to her, and what I think people don't know about psychosis is maybe it's one of the things that people don't understand is a psychotic person they're afraid, actually. That's fundamentally what's happening. And when they act out, it's not like because, I want to hurt you. It's because they're afraid. They're really, so think about it as you and I are having this conversation that's bi-directional, although I'm doing most of the talking, right? The person who's psychosis is a disease of thought process. So normal thought process, we say, it goes from, like, you have the thought A, B, and C, right? Psychotic person, it's A to C to E, come back to A. It's a disruption of thought process. So imagine if you have a disruption of your thought process, you feel very vulnerable, right? Scary. It's scary. And that's fundamentally what the psychotic person is experiencing when they see all these people coming at them wearing riot gear, right? So they're not like, oh, great, they're going to help me in this hospital. So understanding what the psychotic person is actually experiencing is fundamental to being able to help them, no matter how sick they are, right? So actually, I was able. First, I just addressed the person like what I just said. I know you're terrified. You must be terrified, even though she looks really aggressive, right? She looks like she's she tries to punch the officers when they remove one of the restraints. And then, I try to be as clear, just, I'm only here to help you. That's it. Not here to do anything else. Only here to help. And, can I get you out of the chair? I will not let them, do anything to you. And you have to keep your word. You can't So fear is really what's happening, what drives somebody. Like, why would somebody put feces into their arm, right? So because they're afraid that the treatment they're getting, they don't trust the people who are treating them. And here's something that happened. So as soon as I walked out of the room and she'd agreed to get onto the bed, I heard nurses and officers and people talking about her, like what she had done at the hospital there, NCIW, and she was this and she was that and she was really this and she did that and she punched somebody and then and then I realized, she can hear you, by the way. And so if you treat someone like an animal, guess what? They're going to act like it, right? So stop talking about her and what she's done. You don't pretend you know nothing about her, and start from scratch. She's going to act the way you expect her to and the way you're treating her. You have these 10 guys wearing, like full on riot gear. So, I think it's unfortunate that you have severely mentally ill people in corrections, which is what has happened over the last 40 years.
Should there be more mental hospitals?
Yes. So there's a chart, I wish I had it, which shows you the number of hospital beds since 1965 to present versus the number of prison cells, right? So, and it's inverse. So the number of psychiatric beds has gone down and the number of prison cells has gone up. Okay. Like it looks like an X. And I think it was well-intentioned. There was a time where there was this notion that we wanted to deinstitutionalize people. And I think that's great, but I do think there was no plan on how to do that, how to make sure that people were going to be able to get the resources they needed, and track that. And so what ended up happening is people would, at some point be sick enough to commit a crime and then end up in the jail system and then ultimately in the prison system. You have 5 licensed psychiatric hospitals in California Department of Corrections. So, there are hundreds of beds, each of them, by the way. This isn't a small number. So, and that has been kind of happening for the last, 30, 40 years, and people don't see. So they don't see somebody who has enucleated now twice their eye because they're somewhere else. They're in a prison somewhere. And then it doesn't become a priority for anyone. It doesn't become an issue for anyone. And I think that it's hard also, even when I'm explaining it, to imagine some of these things, right? Like it's hard to even think about how this occurs, and yet it happens every day. Maybe not these particular egregious events, but we track, certainly the suicide rates in corrections are disproportionately higher. And I've seen everything. I've seen somebody, I've cut somebody down who's hanging in a cell. I've seen somebody who's lacerated their vein and arteries to the artery in particular to the point where you're 3 of us are trying to just exert pressure inside prison, right? And I've seen people, swallow forks, knives. Yes, they're plastic, but they also swallow other things they find syringes, they find little pieces of things. And these are really severe acts of self-harm, right? And they're hidden, they're kind of away in the prison system. And these are people who, it's really impossible to imagine they're going to be able to advocate at that time for themselves when they're so psychotic, right? So it's a I think you asked me a question and I took an hour to answer it, but I do feel like I do feel like you can make a difference. I mean, you have to be willing to be part of a system if you want to change it. You know, I can sit out. I can just say like, oh, it's bad and da 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 da. But if I've worked at the county, federal, and state correctional system, and I can at least say now, having worked there and having seen the way they're run, and also having attempted to bring changes, you know, I feel like I've done something about it. I've really tried. And, you know, I wish those patients were not incarcerated, and had never been in that position. But I think there's still ways that we can, when they are incarcerated, we can still prevent them from coming back. We can get them better. We can always do better in terms of our, you know, looking ahead, you have to look at a person who's severely mentally ill and think about their future just as you would with somebody who has cancer. You know, you can't just be like, oh, we're going to give him a shot of Haldol and he'll calm down.
And I imagine that these prisoners were mentally ill before they committed their crimes.
Yes. So, I mean, and we have evidence of that because the county system, every time you interact with the county system through a county ER or the Department of Mental Health, it's tracked. So there's like pages and pages and pages and pages. It's not like a mystery, you know. This is not, it's not a mystery at all. And a lot of these people, you know, a lot of the patients, really, there are not enough beds. Okay, so I can go to court. I could go to court and say I need this person to stay in a hospital for 30 days or longer, let's say. Even if the court agrees with me, or the judge agrees, I have to show that the person lacks capacity for informed consent. We don't have enough beds. So you know what one of the top risks is for suicide completion? Having been discharged in the last 30 days from a psychiatric hospital. So is it that the psychiatric hospital did something to increase their suicide risk? No, it's probably they were discharged a little early, right? And there's people waiting for that bed. And, you know, probably we don't have a great way of kind of capturing that person in the community level, right? And suicide is the second leading cause of death for people under 24, and it's the 10th leading cause of death in the United States. So this is not like some, you know, the cases I talked about might seem egregious, but people being severely ill and taking their life is more commonplace, unfortunately, now in terms of a public health crisis. So, you know, and imagine in corrections, it's a higher rate than the community for suicide completion. It's quite compelling to see, you know, how there's a lot of money that's spent looking at this, trying to understand why do inmates keep trying to kill themselves? Why aren't we doing better? Maybe if we do this questionnaire, maybe if we do that questionnaire. But, you know, I think the bigger picture, if you pan out, is like, how did we get here? How did this person end up here? And how can we, what do we do to make the communities have to care, Mark? And this is, you know, everyone can say they care about mental health awareness, # mental health awareness. Like, I hear this all the time, right? But, you know, at the community level, when it comes down to it, it's like nobody really wants to have an increase, say 0.25% in their taxes to go to more psychiatric beds, and or nobody wants it in their neighborhood, right? Like and so there are, I think people feel like they do care, but we're beyond just that. We need people to really advocate for and be behind some of these big system changes that need to occur. And otherwise, this is a circular problem. I mean, it doesn't take a genius to see how this is happening over and over again. But people have to be willing to really see the people who are severely ill as being those worthy of having a better quality of life. That it's important. They have to have the same value, and I think I hear people say they have empathy, and I think they do. I don't think they're disingenuous, but it's going to take more than that. We really can't. We have to be able to tolerate, some degree of compromise, whether it's, hospitals. We have, during the pandemic. I'm sorry if I'm talking too much. I'll give you an example. During the pandemic, the early days of the pandemic, doctors have groups on Facebook, and one of my friends who's a urologist was like, "This is going to be terrible. That the patients are not going to get hospitalized, or there are not going to be enough hospital beds, and people are going to die." And I remember I responded like, I don't know if you know this, but like this happens like every day in psychiatry. So there's a psychiatrist right now in an ER going through and looking to decide who gets to go to the hospital and who's going to be sent to the community, because there's not enough beds. Because they call you to DC the hold. That's what it's called from the ER. DC hold. Can you come down? DC the hold. The police put on. And we have that happen every single day. We don't have enough beds for people, And I thought to myself, you're right. There's not going to be enough beds, if this pandemic takes over. But we already have this problem. People who have a severe mental or any neuropsychiatric diagnosis, their lifespan is 7 years shorter than somebody who doesn't, and that's controlling for suicide. Okay, if you have schizophrenia, it's 10 years or more shorter, but your functional status is equivalent to that of somebody who has paraplegia. Okay, and so we have to start thinking about it that way. Are we giving the same resources to somebody who has schizophrenia, who might need, who can't use their limbs? Do we care in the same way? Do we see them as needing the same kind of care and level of care? So there has to be, I think, a shift not only in what we say, but in what we do, and what we. I could go on and on about this, but there are ways, and I'm trying to do that. I am trying to do my part in it, and part of it has to do with there's very little enforcement of the mental health parity laws. We have them now, but that doesn't mean that they're actually being enforced, and so that means insurance companies still create a huge barrier for psychiatric care, and that's why a lot of psychiatrists don't take insurance. And but unless we start challenging these insurance companies about this, and we can, and I do every day, and we file complaints. There's a commission in California, insurance commission to file complaints to. They're not going to hold up to enforce the mental health parity laws, because it's more cost effective for them to get fined once than to actually provide the care, right? So it does take people understanding that psychiatry is not behavioral health. It's not something first of all, the word behavioral health I have a huge problem with, because we don't say that about cardiology. We don't call it behavioral heart health, do we? And we know that a lot of diseases related to cardiology are due to behavior, right? But we call behavioral health something like, oh, you know what, you just had you weren't able to control it, so here we are, having to give you extra care because of your behavior. It's stigmatized just to begin with, and we need to realize, no, it's psychiatry, it's under neuropsychiatry, and it deserves the same exact level of care and attention as all the other specialties under the American Board of Medical Specialties, because it is a medical specialty. But if we let the insurance companies define it as this behavioral health, like ambiguous thing out there somewhere, then it's harder to enforce as well. It's harder to track. It becomes this otherness, and it shouldn't. That's number one. So that's a way of really, there's people you can catch before they're homeless, and those people are people who we have good care now. We have ways of actually treating addiction. We have ways of treating psychosis. We have ways of treating acute suicidal ideation that we never had before, even before I started residency. One of the questions I'm asked a lot is, how do you feel taking care of people who are accused of some of the worst crimes, that you can think of, like killing their own children. I'm a human, right? So I also, I have feelings, and I can empathize, right, with victims. I do, but yet, I'm not a judge, and I'm not the jury, right? So I'm not there. My job is I'm not a police officer. I'm only there. The same reason I'm there on the outside, right, is to take care of this patient. And, seeing somebody who it comes in on the first day of their first time in jail, accused of killing their own children. So I've seen that more than once, so it's not, unfortunately. But, one case, somebody's accused of killing 3 of her children, right? And they're all under 2.5. And there's like several aspects of it that are, you're absolutely like seeing people at their worst day ever, worst time, like lowest point, right? This is like low, right? But I'm still their doctor. So I'm still there to make sure that they're gonna be alive through whatever's coming, right? And I think it sounds like it would be very difficult to separate one's own feelings from caring for a person. But in reality, people are not black and white. No situation is black and white. It's not like, I'm not saying people are not, I'm not guilty necessarily of horrible crimes, but there's like a whole life, right? That and a lot of, and there's a person still there. And I know we use this term. I say it all the time, like psychopath. Yeah, like this is a psychopath. There's a narcissist. I hate to blow like the bubble of identifying people who commit horrible crimes with that, but very few people actually really truly meet a diagnostic criteria of true personality disorder, and it's not necessarily the like a socio. We don't use that term. There's a need in society, I think, to make sense of what people see as the crimes people commit. People are capable of doing horrible things, like regular people. It's not like, oh, this person is like, was committing crimes their whole life and then all of a sudden, no. Everyone, in my opinion, has the capacity to end up in jail, because I've seen a lot of people there who didn't think they were going to end up there. And, humans are not, humans are, we regulate ourselves ideally in society, but we're imperfect. fundamentally. And there are many situations where, where one thing can lead to a pretty significant harm of another person. And, I have to be able to look at the person I'm seeing as my patient first, right? As like fundamentally, that's my patient. It's sad that this person in particular who was convicted of killing her 3 children, and it's not a HIPAA violation because it was all the medical records were in court. But her 3 children, I have empathy, obviously, for the family's loss. It's sad. I had a child about the same age as one of her children, but she's my patient fundamentally, and I, she was vilified. This is, can you imagine like how vilified, and she was, and in a way, like I even like people, like it's interesting, even like some therapists at the jail would be like, oh God, how do you stand seeing her? Like I have a baby. I can't imagine what it's like to talk to her. And, I would hope that if your sister has postpartum psychosis, that they would they would be treated by a doctor with the neutrality and empathy that's needed, right? And not without the judgment that the rest of the universe is so drawn to assigning to this person. It can be, and it's hard to also hear about these things, right? So somebody who murders their 3 young children and then stabs herself in her heart, right? Like on day 4, so she had to go to the hospital for the pneumothorax, and then she was transferred. The looking at hearing the story also from her perspective and the things that were going on, it's, you can have more than one victim, and there often is. How's that? And you have to be able to see that to provide care. There's usually more than one victim. It's not so simple. But you have to be able to still be able to instill hope in somebody who has no reason to live. So the highest risk for suicide, completion, and corrections is first time incarcerated and killed their children. Yeah, highest risk. Those are like, just, there's no, like it doesn't matter what they say. I don't want to kill myself. Okay, no, they're still the highest risk. And you have to somehow, we had her on suicide watch. Longest inmate ever at LA County was 1 year and 1 month. It's my job to get her through trial, right? She's got to get her through trial. And she was 2 people watching her, so I had a 2 1-to-1. But still, how do you instill a sense that there's even a life to be had, right? In someone who has gone through this. I think it's going to sound kind of odd, maybe, but I often tell inmates this who either are there for something really serious or they're convicted of, they get life without parole. Or it's not going to work out well, They try to kill themselves a lot. So that's the population that's really a high-risk population. Because the hopelessness in it, is really high. And, it's the easiest thing I can do is actually treat a psychotic person who's really psychotic. I know how to do that, the hardest thing to do is to keep somebody who's completely hopeless and is going to spend the rest of their life behind bars from not killing themselves. That's really hard, right? So how do you do that? Where do you even start? Fundamentally, you've got to be able to, you have to get that person to a point where they can see that life means different things. So my life, I'm a doctor. I live in, I live in a house, whatever. Okay, that's my life. But does that mean that my life is more meaningful than somebody who, than one of my relatives who's, still in Iran and, lives in an apartment or is in prison? So no. So your life is still your life. It's what you're going to make of it. And how are you going to live? What are you going to do with your time? And that's what is really important to, if you don't believe somebody's life has worth, who's done a horrible thing or is accused of a horrible thing, they're not going to believe it either. So why would I think somebody like that's life would have worth? I think because there's lessons to be learned from everyone. And everyone can do something. They can add still to improving to preventing something from happening, to helping, to keep other people from doing the same thing. You have to be able to see beyond just the final, this is like, you've done all you can in life and now it's like over. It's, and I do think that people can contribute and can make life meaningful, even if they're behind bars. I mean, I've seen people who are freer, who are behind bars, than people who are on the outside, mentally freer, right? And that is, it has to, you have to get to that point. You got it. But if I don't believe it, they're not going to start there on day one when you see them. I have to believe that their life still has worth, right? And they can do something. And I tell them, and they can, there's a lot you can still do. And, if I used to tell one inmate, the first 10 years when you get LWOP, first 5 in particular is really hard. First 5 years, the person is in complete denial. They're in the isolation unit, in the SHU. They're committing every crime possible. They're trying to kill themselves because there's no incentive when you give someone life without parole. Like, why would you not break every rule, right? And I remember this one particular inmate, it was like those first 5 years, and she'd say, but I have, my life is meaningless, and you don't know that because your life, you're not stuck here forever, and she was younger than me, right? And, the only thing I could think of saying was, but I'm here 45 hours a week with you, right? So like, I'm actually here more hours that I'm awake than I am on the outside. So I must think that you're worth it. And people hear that this is a community and this is a society. These are people who, have a worthwhile existence. And that really, I don't know how she took it, but I really spent a lot of time thinking about that, you can, people who are incarcerated, you've got to look at incarceration as, if that's where they end up, whether it's life without parole or it's a sentence where they can, do something different, or maybe it's the goal of like becoming a firefighter, part of the firefighter, 2,000 firefighters in California are inmates, 200 are female from CIW, and one died actually in the Malibu fires, about 6-7 years ago. So, people don't like know that, but you can aspire, there are things you can aspire to do, and you can have a meaning, you can have an impact. And at the women's prison, so there's a program where they train service dogs, and the dogs actually stay with the inmate for about a year, like in their cell and et cetera. And so you can have a meaningful life. It's really hard, I guess, to see that on the outside or even maybe on the inside. But, it's there. If life is going to end that moment when that person hits jail after they're accused of this horrendous crime, then as a society, we're now, I'm failing the person really, like altogether, because locking somebody up in a cell that's not like to do nothing, to have no meaning in their life for the next 20, 30 years, that's missing an opportunity, in my opinion. And so I really think, and that's what you have to be able to communicate to someone who's going to kill themselves because they just killed their 3 children when they come in. We don't need people to get to the point where they're in prison, and in order to have a psychiatrist see them, and so everyone it does really matter, how we look at psychiatry in general, and in bringing it back into taking it away from this term of behavioral health. All insurance plans, except for Medicare, still have it divided up: behavioral health and then quote medical. No, it's psychiatry. And so I have 2 contracts with insurance plans. I have a behavioral health, then I have a medical one, because when I order an EKG, I have to do it under this one. I mean, of course, psychiatrists aren't going to take insurance if you're making it so difficult where I have to panel twice, bill twice, right? And I'm paid 30% less, by the way, for the same billing code as a psychiatrist than I am under my contract as a PCP, right? So what's the incentive for psychiatrists to take insurance? Very little. And so these might sound unrelated. It might sound like when I'm talking about people enucleating themselves in prison and mental health parity laws not being enforced in the community might sound completely unrelated, but they're not. It's part of the same equation, actually, because everyone has the same risk for schizophrenia, by the way. So it doesn't discriminate. It's not, and once it's your family member, once it's somebody that then people do care. Like once their kid is in jail, yeah, they're much more invested in how this system works and doesn't work. But it impacts enough people. If you look at the number of people who are incarcerated and on antipsychotics, the number of people who are homeless, the number of people who commit suicide each year, where not closing this loop to access, and I don't mean just hospital beds, I mean what I was just talking about, care in the outpatient community, right? That we don't necessarily have a lack of psychiatrists, by the way. A lot of our psychiatrists who are working in the prison system, like I was for many years. We have a lack of parity in terms of reimbursement. So psychiatry is the second specialty after plastic surgery, dermatology, where it's in terms of out-of-pocket reimbursement. That means it's like a luxury. And it should never be like that. It has turned into like luxury treatment. Like you get to see a psychiatrist, you get to get to go to the plastic surgeon.
Is schizophrenia one of the worst problems you see? This seems to be like overarching, kind of covers a lot of problems, right? I think schizophrenia, and combined with substance use disorders, it's very hard. At some point, it's hard to really dissect the two, because people who are ill will self-medicate. And then the way they self-medicate is often problematic in terms of whether it's, I feel like this is gonna like make me the most unpopular human being on the internet, but so cannabis, although very widely accepted and everyone like it's legal. So it is
one of the main environmental contributors to a psychotic break that leads to schizophrenia.
Yeah, I've seen it on Skid Row.
Yeah, we've
So
seen
many people with schizophrenia say they started with.
I see it once a week in my clinic, and I don't need any more psychotic people. None of us need more. So a study just came out in JAMA that, based on the Canadian registry, that shows since cannabis became legal in Canada, there's been a 3-fold increase in schizophrenia diagnoses. And these are young. So these are young. So the reason why this is really important is these are young people, right? So these are usually people under 25. And once you have schizophrenia, the goal really is now to prevent you from going backwards. You know, it's very hard now to look to have the same expectation of the person, because it's a serious illness, and we are trying to now just keep the person from having another psychosis. We're trying to keep the person housed, keep the person compliant with, medication, and it drastically changes their life. Fortunately, studies show, the earlier we treat and we catch someone, the better, and that's part of why I'm back in the community and not in the correctional system, is to kind of understand how do people keep ending? Why do people keep coming back to prison and jail? We do have ways of treating early and seeing better outcomes and prognosis, but cannabis use is one of the, especially in males under 20, between the ages of 15 and 24. It's even a higher risk. It's a neurotoxin, and it's a pro-psychotic. So everyone has a psychotic threshold. I know this is too medical maybe for this, but everyone can become psychotic. Everyone can, and I know that because they're, I don't do ECT at all, but back in the day when they did, that's how you if you don't get the seizure through the electrical current, you can give the person 500 milligrams of caffeine to induce a seizure. So everyone has a seizure threshold, but we also know from studies that people have a psychosis threshold based on unfortunate data from prisons and isolation units, that if you keep somebody awake long enough, they'll become psychotic, right? So many substances add to that. A pro-psychotic, right? So there's number one, meth. So meth, I tell people this all the time. I've had so many patients, thousands who use meth. And I've said, I was able to reverse the psychosis this time, but there's gonna come a time when I'm not. And then there's no difference between you and somebody who has schizophrenia. I can't reverse it. There is a point at which, those dopamine receptors are just, they're burnt out. And so, so their substance use concurrent with mental illness, which I think the data is about 30 to 50%. There's a concurrent substance use again, and I think it's for self-medication. I think it's the two kind of go hand. What came first, the chicken or the egg? Well, I don't think we've quite teased that out. We just know that it's a risk factor, at least with schizophrenia and cannabis, and earlier onset, which is not favorable. I think in general, schizophrenia is probably it is the most debilitating, but there are also people who have actually the most lethal of all illnesses is bipolar disorder. So 15% of people who have bipolar disorder, true bipolar disorder, will commit complete suicide. They will kill themselves. 15%, the highest of any diagnosis.
Really?
Yeah. So. And it's not subtle, and I know a lot of people. I hear this all the time. People think they have bipolar disorder. It is a severe illness because 15% of them are going to die at their own hands. Okay, so, and the people who are like you see on TV, like the police chases, the car chases. I know who those are because they come to the ER. Like we have a door in the back where the police, actually, they don't even have to go through the front. The police, there's this door that opens in the Psych ER at County, and the police car opens the back, and they just bring the person like falls out into like the Psych ER, right? And those people are manic. It's really interesting. They're super manic. They're like on top of the world. They're like really manic. There's like, I'm driving to Vegas, and it's like, I mean, I can't tell you how many times I've seen that, and it's very severe. It has really severe consequences, and it's one of the more challenging, I would say, disorders to treat because people may seem higher functioning, and they are at times than somebody who has schizophrenia.
They have episodes.
And they're not compliant usually because...
Yeah, see, that's the other thing. How do you get these people to take the medications that you're prescribing?
Yeah, the number one reason for discontinuation of medications is side effects, right?
Is what?
Side effects.
Side effects.
So, try identifying, and even the most, say, psychotic person, or even in their most manic state, you can reason with that. You can reason. It's like you don't want to give somebody something that makes them feel so shitty that they're never going to want to see a psychiatrist again, right? So part of it has to really do with it's doable, but it's hard, but has to be with buy-in. So it has to be that the person has to see that there is there's value in it for them, and the right medication is the one you don't feel you're taking. I tell, if they're on an antipsychotic or on it, they shouldn't feel different. It should just be, you shouldn't even know that you're on it. That's how we should aim. That's what we should be aiming for if we want people to be compliant, right? So you can, it takes a lot of patience, and you have to be super optimistic, I think, to do what I do, because people do become non-compliant a lot, and you can't be angry. That's not the way you deal with it. You have to see that as part of the process, and also look and see, like, what could I have done differently? I think there's always it's always important at an individual. I can sit here and go through all the things in the system that are wrong, that can be fixed, this, that, but at the end of the day, at the individual level, I have to always look at what I could have done better or what I could have done differently for each patient, and learn from it, because I can't just blame a system. When somebody doesn't get better, it's up to, fundamentally, it's my job, it's my oath, right? So, there are situations that I still think about every day. Not every day, but I would say often, that I've not forgotten, where I know maybe I came in late in the game, but I still bear responsibility for the outcome. Like somebody who, we talked a little bit about swallowing, but there's a way, a very dangerous, self-injurious act, which is swallowing, and that means swallowing really anything, honestly. The goal is not to die, by the way. This isn't like a suicide attempt. It's a non-lethal self-injurious behavior, but it's pretty severe, right?
And they'll be swallowing what kind of things?
Okay, so...
Like you mentioned plastic forks and spoons and knives?
So keys, coins, hairbrush.
Razor blades?
Absolutely, for sure. Razor blade, hairbrush, a piece of, even like a plastic bottle I've actually seen, like on an X-ray, bottle of it's not uncommon, I guess, in inpatient state-level psychiatric setting because it happens. It's you almost learn kind of how to gauge from the object how serious it's going to be. Like, which end of the fork? Like, did they swallow it? It's like, I mean, it sounds so surreal, but my husband was in the car once when I was on call, and I was and somebody had swallowed a utensil, and I said, "Well, is it the fork or the spoon?" And my husband was like, "This is so odd." I said, "Well,
makes a difference.
Makes a difference." Like, how much time do we have? And so it's I think a lot of people don't know about swallowing. It's very hard to treat and control in any psychiatric environment, and we tend to rely on one state hospital, Metropolitan State Hospital. When I was a resident in my last year, my fourth year, there was a patient I was seeing who was transferred from Metropolitan, and she had a history of swallowing foreign objects. What happens over time is, yes, they can do a scope and they can remove it, but there's damage, over time to the gastrointestinal tract in particular. And she was 26, and she had recently swallowed, I think it was like a pen or a part of a pen, and they had done a scope and they had removed it. But she really wasn't at the point where we could quite send her back to Metropolitan. And I've been, in the hospital, she's in the medical ward. So I have like 20, 30 patients you check on a day. So I see a lot of people, but she was somebody who I would say was on the sicker end of the spectrum, even though she didn't look like it. She was very cogent, very polite. In a way, I see that now as she presented really well, and that did impact ultimately my decision. And she had been swallowing various objects for many years because she had this kind of horrible life, and a lot of people have horrible lives and horrible childhoods. And
do you get to hear their stories, the backstories?
That's right. I see people on the worst day of their life usually, right? It's like the first day in jail, or if you're in a psych ER, or you're in a hospital trying to kill yourself, right? Yeah, it's like the absolute worst, right? So ultimately, I may not ask right away about their history, but it's important. It's important for me to know, because there are very few instances where it's not going to be related to where they're at right now. And if anything, also I have to kind of understand, like, how can I? Is there anyone in this person's life who I can connect them to, right? So for this, it took her a while to open up, but she had a twin sister, and they had been sexually abused by their father from the age of 6, and their mother was not in the picture. And when they were 16, on their 16th birthday, they decided to commit suicide. And her sister did die, but she lived. She was resuscitated. So it's like tragedy upon tragedy, right? I mean, in one way, you're now free from this abuse, but you lost this one person who, understands you, and there's a lot. I mean, there's so many layers of guilt, and so she has been, at least for several years at that point in an institutional Metropolitan State Hospital, but again, back and forth with county hospital due to medical needs after swallowing. She was really, really like, she presents, we say euthymic, which means like not depressed, not anxious. She was, very, very, linear thought process. She was really like actually conversational when she got comfortable. But, we have a sitter with the person who swallows objects. So there's somebody there with her 24 hours a day. And unfortunately, sometimes we have to place the person in what are called soft restraints in the hospital, which are fabric, but it's to prevent them from harming themselves. These are medical restraints, which are not the same as the psychiatric restraints, which are called hard restraints. There's still a restraint. It's still unpleasant. Okay, it still takes a whole layer of ordering and really thinking about why is this person need soft restraints. But with her, I had not moved to the point of feeling comfortable enough to remove the sitter or remove keep her out of the restraints for the whole day. The soft restraints. I mean, she could go to the bathroom. Obviously, she ate food. We would. But I didn't know her well enough. And then the lethality of the types of swallowing she had historically done that led to Metropolitan, her being at Metropolitan, were pretty significant. But, she was like so affable and just seemed so like not in distress. Like she didn't look like someone who was like going to, take my pen and swallow it. Like she just didn't seem like that. And, I really, so, I'd usually see her at the end of the day because I'd spend more time with her. And there was a Friday, and sometimes she'd ask for things, and people do that, and you really have to have boundaries. I don't usually go and get something extra for someone, but, she'd asked for like, there's a Subway sandwich or something across, and she'd asked for Subway, and I'd gotten it for her because there was no medical reason not to, and I really didn't feel like there was. I didn't feel like I was being manipulated. I didn't feel like there was a boundary issue with it, And on this Friday, I remember it was like 6:30, and I went to see her, and she looked great. She looked good. Everything was going well, and she asked me to go to get her if she could have a Subway sandwich. And if I could get her one before I left. And, I could have, but I really wanted to go home. And I had small kids, and I felt like I was tired. It was like a 60, 70-hour week, and I just wanted to go home.
And you were already giving her a bunch of your time.
Yeah, definitely. I felt like it was still across the street. It was like, 15 minutes there, 15 minutes back. And so I told her, look, I'll get it free Monday. I'll come with the sandwich, before I see you. I'm just really tired. I want to get home. But I promise on Monday. And when I say I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it, and I'm going to do it. I promise. And she was like, okay, no problem. No, that's fine, And I thought, well, yeah, I'll get her a sandwich on Monday. On Monday, when I went to see her, and I did get the Subway with the Subway sandwich. She was in the ICU, and they said that she had somehow, even though she was on a 1-to-1 and mostly in soft restraints, she had found like a piece of a syringe and swallowed it and had perforated, and she died. She ended up dying actually that day. And, it's not like, would the Subway sandwich have like changed her life and brought her sister back and kept her from like doing this? No, I don't think so. I know it's not about the Subway sandwich, but I also know that I know that she wasn't asking me just for a Subway sandwich at that moment, and I didn't read that, and she did need something more, and that was People who present really well, it's sometimes harder to grasp how sick they might be. And I when I was casual and said, I'll bring it to you Monday, I missed her cue of what she was telling me. And, I think about that till this day because, people who end up doing things where they actually end up dying, they don't tell you they're going to do it. That's not who usually ends up dying. It's the people who don't, and you have to be able to understand where they're getting at.
You did nothing wrong. Getting a sandwich is not in your job description,
right?
And you still did it anyway on the next workday.
Yeah, I felt really guilty because I put my kids and prioritized them over her that moment, and everybody will say like, well, family, you're done with your day, you've been there all week, and family comes first. But actually, so family doesn't come first when you become a doctor. When you sign on to become a physician, no, your patients actually come first. You have to have 2 backup plans for your kids, like if they're sick. You cannot. That's, in that moment, I realized, I fucked up actually because I wanted to go home and see my kids, and I was impatient, and I was, over time, what I've done is I've taught my kids that I have a commitment to patients, and it doesn't mean that they're not a priority, but they kind of have to share me in ways that maybe other kids don't have to share their mom. Like I have to go in on a Saturday or at night, or I might stay late because somebody's really sick, and that's that's different. That's different than I think what most people as parents, you have a schedule. You don't tell your kids that necessarily, and so it's hard. But I did that moment feel like she needed me to stay longer.
Yeah, but I'm not convinced you dropped the ball. I think you still did above and beyond what you're required to do.
I hope so. I think about I'm glad I still think about her because it allows me to acknowledge, I've seen thousands and thousands and thousands of people, but she's somebody who, is kind of at the forefront of my mind. And I'm glad I still think about her because she reminds me of, how fragile life is, number one. We even as a doctor, we see a lot of death. I see a lot of bad things happen. But it's really, there is a real fragility to life. We can take it for granted in the United States in particular. It seems like you could live forever. But no, people are mortal. And you can't prevent every death. And maybe, and that's impossible. But you can, my goal is to prevent suffering. And, was I able to prevent her suffering that weekend or that day? Probably not. There's something I missed. And I, people who are deeply suffering may not say it, right? So, I think about it in terms of what a patient is not telling me is as important as what they're telling me.
Yeah, but with mentally ill people, you're inevitably going to run into somebody who does something like that.
Yeah.
And then you feel responsible. And they're just so mentally unstable that these kind of events will happen over and over.
It's true, but I did feel with I still feel like, I think people have asked me, I don't talk about this.
The sandwich on Friday would have saved her life.
Now, people tell me this, like, this is a ridiculous association. I only talk about it with other psychiatrists or other doctors because it's like, this is not fodder for like a cocktail party. Like she swallowed the syringe and then perforated and, I got her a Subway sandwich and I'm having a bad day.
Do you feel like the price you pay for doing this kind of work outweighs the benefit, the help that you give, or the good that you're doing?
That's a great question, Mark. So you have to be really good at compartmentalizing to do this, and I mean, like, on that day where I found out she died, I had like 10 more patients to see, right? So I'm not going to walk in and say, "Oh, it's really tough. My patient died," so. You compartmentalize it. Like this is you become a master at compartmentalizing, and but there, you can, everything can be overdone. So I think one of the problems I think medicine selects for people who are really good at compartmentalizing, but we over compartmentalize at some point and never quite have an opportunity to, the way I'm talking about this with you, it was uncomfortable for me, right? Because this feels like I'm disclosing some magical secret or something, but it feels like these are things that other people might not quite understand and might feel like it might be disturbing to a lot of people. I don't want to disturb them, So those stay inside, right? And I still see really sick people every day, really, really sick people, like in and out of the hospital. I mean, every day. And especially since the pandemic, it has not gotten better. It's gotten really hard for people under 24 and over 65. And I used to take care of people in nursing homes during the pandemic. And, there's a lot of difficult things to see. I think it does take a toll. I think it takes years. It doesn't happen overnight, though. It kind of creeps up on you. And what I feel like I got medicine, the practice of medicine's gotten easier, but the practice of life has gotten harder in a lot of ways. Like, I'm a really good unitasker. I'm really good at, like, if you throw me in the middle of, like, a psychiatric hospital with like 200 people, I'll know what to do. But I really don't I'm really uncomfortable going to like this like soccer parent meeting. I just feel really like, and I don't know why, but I just feel like I don't feel the same. I feel somehow like I don't belong, or
there's more important fish to fry.
I don't think that it's even that there. Maybe it's being overstimulated. Yeah, you're right. Like, there's an overstimulation that takes place, and it distracts you from your own life, right? When you're in those situations all day long.
Very dedicated to your work.
Yeah, and then when you're not in those situations, you're kind of. I'm not sure. I just don't know exactly I don't know. It's hard to explain, but like, I don't know what's like totally appropriate and so I think there's a degree of self-isolation that does take place. I think people find it it's hard for them to I'm actually kind of an introvert, but it doesn't seem like I am because I'm not that way at work at all. But when I'm not at work, I do spend time, obviously, with my kids who are getting old, one's in college, and my family. But I kind of probably have less. This is what it is. I think I have so many stories I've compartmentalized that I can't make small talk with people.
That makes sense.
I just can't. Like, I use up everything I have. And so it's hard. So
the compassion fatigue in doing this kind of work must be immense.
Exactly. And like, I just can't, like when I'm, even my neighbor, I go running and, it's really, I have these like headphones on, but they're actually not really sometimes playing anything. I just don't, it sounds horrible, but like, I feel like I can't, I don't want to have stop and have a conversation, which is like not what I would tell my patients to do at all. Like I would tell them it's really good to talk to, just say hi to people and say to your neighbors, and studies show it's like really does impact your brain function. But myself, I find that I'm like I have like I'm overloaded now with compartments of many, many, many stories, but I love what I do. I feel like I never regret the choice I made, including working in corrections and with a sicker patient population. I think my kids have probably paid a more of a price just because I had them in med school and residency and the kind of work I've done. But I think they've grown to have a sense of, well, they've seen it. They understand it in a way that I think has helped them. Hopefully, I don't know. But I've tried to be there if I'm not at work. I try to do whatever, be with my kid. Like I don't have like much of a middle. I guess like I don't think I have a life. Otherwise, like other than my kids, and now when my kids start growing up, though, the question is like, now what? Oh, yeah, like I'm pretty much like a really good unitasker. Like I don't really have many dimensions to me, other than, working with really, really, with not just really sick people, but with people who are really struggling, like at the worst time of their life. And I do feel good about it because I feel like there's a saying. I have my aunt, well, let me back up. My aunt, the one who died, who committed suicide, she had knit me a baby blanket. And when we left Iran, we really didn't take, we had like a duffel bag or something. And some reason this blanket came with me. And it's one of the few things I have actually from my childhood. And I have it framed now in the office. And I look at it every day and I think to myself, like, one person that I can, if I can save one person's life, it's totally worth it. All of it's worth it, because when I look at my aunt and the impact of the loss on her children and all of us. So there's a saying in Judaism: to save one life is to save the world. And I'm not saying I go around saving lives all day long like I'm some hero, but I do believe that doing this work or doing this does make me feel like I have a purpose, and I've tried my best. I can complain about society and people and systems and governments and political parties, but fundamentally, what am I doing on my part? What's my part, and I think my part is now, I'm trying to, before I was blowing whistles in the correctional system and trying to bring change there. And now I'm, trying to keep make insurance companies do what they're supposed to do, which is a lot of work, actually. But, it's doable. And that was one of my goals, was to show that, it can be done. And we have to start at that community level. We can't just, we can't just look at it there are really, really sick people, and then there's people who are going to become really sick, right, who have the potential. So the only way we can kind of resolve, we've been approaching this problem starting with looking at like why people commit suicide in corrections, which is a good question, and millions of dollars are spent trying to answer that, but we've got to go way back, right? That person who were they? Where were they? When was the ball dropped, right? And why? And, What were all the ways in which that person could have not become homeless, not run away, right? So what are, even before we get to that point, right? So, so I do feel like, on an individual level, it allows me to feel like I am making some change.
I'm sure you are.
It's not the whole system, but on a day-to-day basis, I feel like I can. If somebody tells me like, my success is when a patient who was really sick, I think he had 2 DUIs, multiple things. I mean, just he was actually at times at Skid Row, at times not. It was just going through this. It was this roller coaster, and I know kind of when the last ride is, and I felt like he was on his last ride, and we got him. I saw him. We got him treatment, which it takes buy-in. They have to be willing to do all the things that. It's not like magical, but they have to be willing to, come to their appointments and do labs and things like that. And then, I usually see patients, even when they're better, like no later than no more than 3 months. Like it just doesn't work like that. I can't lose. It's just too long. So we hadn't heard from him, and we call, we send a letter, and didn't hear back. And I was like, shit. I wonder if he relapsed and he's like, something happened, he's not alive. And a couple weeks later, he called us and he said like he was traveling, like he was somewhere in Tibet or something, like he was doing really well. And I was like, that's perfect. Like, you don't need me. That's success. That's like, that's great. I don't, keep going, keep traveling,
That's wonderful.
Yeah. And so there's also happy endings.
That's great. All right, Torie, thank you so much for sharing your thoughts and stories.
Thank you for having me.
I wish you plenty of luck from here on out.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. When I was designing the first Soft White Underbelly book, I realized that there were so many great portraits that weren't going to make it into that book. They just wouldn't fit. And once I saw how well that first book sold, I knew I'd have to design a second book. This second book is finally ready to ship. Like the first one, this book has a collection of some of the best portraits from Soft White Underbelly, accompanied by a quote from that person's interview. This book features another group of Rebecca portraits, as well as a collection of color images of the Whitaker family, and plenty of others. You can order yours for $125 or $150 for a signed copy at softwhiteunderbelly.org. Again, like the first book, once this book is sold out, I will not be printing more of them. The portraits are what Soft White Underbelly is all about, and these 2 books contain the best of all that work. Thank you for watching.